Maybe the bar for game adaptations is just in hell, but I think Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, despite all the hype, is still being under-discussed as a movie that is revitalizing a niche in the mainstream landscape that had all but gone extinct, or maybe even creating a new one. A high-budget, high-fantasy adventure comedy that could spur a sort of anthology franchise mirroring standalone Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. The possibilities are endless! I think this is so exciting. And that's mostly because now we have proof of concept. This movie is a total blast, and I want to say before we get into anything that this movie is for everyone. It doesn't feel esoteric. You don't need to have played or even know anything about Dungeons & Dragons in order to understand and enjoy it. It was so important for them to strike that balance between being a good adaptation and capturing the ethos of Dungeons & Dragons, and also making it an accessible and fun fantasy adventure for anyone. And I have never played Dungeons & Dragons, but I've been trying to keep up with what people are saying, and I have yet to see a tabletop player take issue with the way that they adapted it. I'm actually seeing a lot of excitement and praise for the lore that they incorporated and how well that they incorporated it. So I'm curious to hear more from you guys in the comments if you have played D&D. It also helps that we know that at least one of the directors is really into it. It is almost poetic that it was co-directed by John Francis Daley, who played Dungeons & Dragons in the final episode of Freaks and Geeks, a show whose cancellation I'm still mourning, where he played Sam Weir when he was 14 years old. He then went on to co-direct Game Night with Jonathan Goldstein as well, which is widely regarded as one of the best studio comedies of the last decade. This was also inspired by a D&D campaign of the main cast, which is so cool. I'll try to link an article about that below. Call it a woman's intuition, but I knew we had this one in the bag. But even I didn't expect it to be my 5th ranked right now out of 31 of this year's releases that I've seen, and it made me cry. I was too embarrassed to admit that at first, but the bastards got me. There is a truly touching story and conclusion behind this plot, where we basically have a gang of ragtag thieves whose ambitions get the best of them. One of their heists goes wrong, they help the wrong people steal the wrong thing, and they have to team up and fix things by way of many rambunctious little side quests. And that's what this is. It's not the Citizen Kane of adventure movies, it's not Return of the King, it's a D&D campaign. It's spontaneous and lighthearted. There are stakes, but that's not so much the main focus. It's about these characters and fun fantasy fare. You get owlbears, magical portals, a chonky dragon, just silly little obstacles like you would see in a game. And it does kind of have a similar personality to Game Night. The comedy is genuinely good. It's very deadpan. All the characters are relatively monotone and nihilistic, and yet stick by each other and try to do the right thing. That's what gives it this really distinct, hilarious tone, but also makes it a nice story that's good for kids. The little kids who were sitting next to me at my screening, the first thing they said was, "I liked the pudgy dragon," and that they want to see it again. My thoughts exactly. Some parts are funnier than others, and the humor admittedly doesn't always hit, but there's definitely a lot of Guardians of the Galaxy energy with this sort of gang of misfits, and the cast is endlessly charming, and they all suit their roles perfectly. Chris Pine is such a legend. Underrated actor, if you ask me. He is such a riot here as the Bard. Definitely a very Chris Pine character. He said he likes it because it's no preparation and lots of smiling. He is technically the main character. The most prevalent emotional thread revolves around him and his daughter, and his efforts to be a better man in spite of his failings are very relatable. They're all very relatable, actually. That's one of the best parts of this. They take the time for all of the characters to have their own arc. Michelle Rodriguez, also a legend. She's so funny and badass in this as Holga. I'm usually lukewarm on Justice Smith, but I loved him here. I think his deadpan demeanor works much better in comedy than it does in drama. Regé-Jean Page, who most people know from Bridgerton, is very good as the very powerful, stoic, human paladin Zank Yendar. Hugh Grant, maybe one of the funniest actors working right now. Sophia Lillis is the last kind of outsider addition to the main group as Doric, and definitely takes a back seat compared to the rest of them, but she's just as charming, and her character really gets to shine in the action scenes where she's shape-shifting. They do some very cool things with that. And the action overall is pretty good. You're not getting John Wick level stuff, when are you? But when it's hand-to-hand, it's decent, and things like the dragon scene and the final battle are sufficiently exciting and just a lot of fun. There's also a scene with with Chris Pine playing the lute to distract some guards that is equally terrifying and hilarious. I was literally losing it. And I really want to talk about the direction and special effects. Maybe what I find the most exciting. This movie has a split diopter shot, dolly zoom, smash in. They use animatronics. I couldn't believe it. And when they do use VFX, it looks really good. They've said in interviews that they used practical effects whenever they could, and it shows. I mean, with the quicksand, the scene that was released with them talking to the corpses is practical. It not only looks better, but it helps because the actor is interacting with something tangible, and so the whole thing just feels more real. And they had a $151 million budget for this, which is high, but it's still less than a lot of big franchise blockbusters where we're getting a much worse quality of production. So huge bravo to Daley and Goldstein, not only for making the camera work exciting, but really caring about having a well-made movie. There are great needle drops. There's this really fun kind of a rock and roll undertone. One issue I did have though is that the score is a little underwhelming. I don't know if it was the sound mixing or the score itself. I will say that Lauren Balfe is admittedly pretty hit or miss for me, but I thought that sometimes took away from the intensity of the moment. I'm also always just bothered by how much is shown in trailers these days. There were a lot in here, especially jokes that I wish we hadn't seen ahead of time. But what are you gonna do? I can't really say that I have other major issues with this film besides the things that we kind of expected from something like this. It's not the most profound story or the tightest narrative. Without getting into spoilers, there is one aspect of the villain that I'd say isn't very memorable, and it can definitely feel exposition heavy at times with a lot of names and backstories, which kind of comes with the territory of having so much lore. But I thought it was well paced, I was never bored, and overall Daley and Goldstein just had a huge task here, and I think they nailed it. Again, not above and beyond masterpiece, but it did what it needed to do. It's very well made and just a ton of fun. So I'm going to give Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves 4 out of 5 stars. We're looking at like a 75%. So I can't wait to see it again. I do recommend seeing it in theaters just for the scale of the action and how good it looks, but also just supporting a movie like this on the big screen. I am such a huge fan of high fantasy, and especially something like this with this lighthearted comedic twist. It's such a delightful genre that can be really accessible, so I really hope that we get more of these in the future. I would watch a million of these if they're done well, and I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt for now. Who knows how it will go? We've seen that franchises can just get worse and worse as they go along. But I don't know, look at John Wick 4, Creed 3, Scream just came back with 6. Maybe Hollywood is finally figuring it out and we'll get a lot more fun adventures out of this. Paramount has something very cool at their disposal, so I just hope they make the most of it. And before I leave, there is one mid-credit scene that's just a fun little gag, and there is one surprise cameo that I actually can't believe hasn't been spoiled on the internet yet, but it's very funny. But let me know your thoughts on Dungeons & Dragons, guys. Do you plan on seeing it this weekend? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.